Today we're going to be talking about finding domain and range graphically. So, up top there's really not a lot of notes to take besides going over examples. So first, remember domain. I'm going to use the capital D for domain. Remember, those are our x values. So if we're talking about my x values, you're always going to work left to right. Again, left to right is the way we read, and it also goes smallest to largest, which is how we're going to want to write our answers. For range, remember range is going to be my possible y values. So range is going to go vertically, so up and down. So for range, you want to start at the bottom and go to the top. Or you can think of it low to high. Alright, so that's how we're going to think about domain and range. So I'm going to zoom in on number 1. So first thing I'm going to find is my domain. Alright, to find my domain, the first thing I'm going to look at is, can you draw this without picking your pencil up or pen? Yes, so I can draw that without picking my pencil or pen up. So that means I'm going to work left to right. So if I scan, this is the furthest left that my graph goes. And it's an arrow. So for domain, we're going to ask ourselves, is that arrow pointing to the left or is it pointing to the right? It's pointing to the left, so that means we're going to start at negative infinity. Then if I scan the graph, that's the furthest right my graph goes. That's an open circle. So again, we're moving left to right. So I'm going to start at the origin and I'm going to move horizontally. So I'm going to count over 1, 2, 3, and it goes to positive 4. Since it's an open circle, I'll use a parentheses. So my domain is simply negative infinity to positive 4. Now for my range, I'm going to go lowest to highest. Now because I have this arrow, that's actually my lowest point. And this time we're going to ask ourselves, is that arrow pointing up or down? That arrow is pointing down, so it's going to be negative infinity. Now my highest point is actually in the middle of the graph, is right there. So we're talking about our y values, so I'm going to count vertically. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, positive 4. See how it's not an open circle, so that's assuming that it's closed. So therefore I would use a bracket. So my range is going to be negative infinity to positive 4. Alright, let's look at number 2. Again, we take a look at this. It can be drawn without picking your pen. It can be drawn without picking your pen or pencil up. So it's a continuous graph. So if we want to start with the domain first, we look how far left does it go. Again, you always start at the origin. If I count over, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it starts at negative 7. It's a bracket because it's a closed circle. This is where it ends. That's the furthest right it goes. Again, I start at the origin and count over 1, 2. So positive 2. Again, it's a closed circle, so you're going to have a bracket. Now if we take a look for our range, again, you're going to go bottom to top, or lowest to highest. So again, if I take a look, my lowest is right here. Again, I start at the origin and count down. 1, 2, 3, negative 4. It's a closed circle, so it's going to have a bracket. And notice that its high point actually happens twice, which is fine. So 1, 2, positive 3. And again, it's a closed circle, so it's going to have a bracket. So your range would therefore be negative 4 to positive 3. Alright, now let's take a look at number 3. Now notice number 3 has 3 different parts. So I'm going to highlight them. So we're going to have a blue, a green, and a pink. Alright, just so it's easier for me to talk about. So to start with your domain, you're just going to look at each piece individually. So if I look, what piece goes to the furthest left? Well, it's the blue piece. So where does the blue piece start? It starts right there. So if I start from the origin and count over, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, -5. It's a close, so it's -5. Where does the blue piece stop? It stops at 1, 2, -3. And again, it's closed, so it's going to have a bracket. I wrote a little too big, so I'm going to write that a little bit smaller. Then all I'm going to do is union. The middle piece is my green, so where does the green piece start? It starts at -1. Where does it stop? It stops right there, so if I start at the origin, count over 1, it stops at +2. And then I go with my third, so I add another union. Where does it start? It starts right there, so if I count over, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's an open circle, so it's going to have a parentheses. And then notice where it ends has an arrow. So again, with domain, we're asking ourselves, is that going left or is it going right? Well, it's going to the right, so that would be positive infinity. Now, if I take a look, are any of these pieces overlapping? So I'm going to ask myself, is there a gap between -3 and -1? Yes, so I can't do anything there. Is there a gap between 2 and 4? Yes, so I can't do anything there. So that right there would be your answer for your domain. Alright, so now let's take a look at my range. So again, if I color coordinate again, alright, so what piece is the lowest? Well, the lowest is this pink piece, and the lowest part is that arrow. So we're going to ask ourselves, since it is the range, are we going to go up or down? Where it's pointing down, so I'm going to start at -infinity. Where does that pink piece stop? Stops right there. Again, I count down from the origin, so it's going to be down 1, so that's -1. I have a parentheses because it's an open circle. Union, what's the next piece? It's this green piece. Notice the green piece is a constant. It stays at -1, so they're going to have brackets because it has a closed circle. Now, where does this last piece start? It starts right here. Notice how it's on the x-axis, which means that my y value is 0. The highest part is right there. If I count from the origin, that would be 1, 2, +3. It has a bracket because of the closed circle. Now if I take a look, see how there's not a gap between -1 and -1. So that means I can cross through that and squeeze that together to make one interval. So this right here would be your final answer for your range. Alright, I'm going to skip down. Let's see, let's look at another one. Let's look at number 5. Alright, so if I color coordinate, we have the yellow and we have the pink. Alright, so again, let's start with domain. So the yellow's the furthest left. So notice that arrow, it's actually getting wider. So it's moving, so we're asking ourselves, is it going to the left? Yes. So it's going to start at -infinity. Where does it stop? It stops right there. So if I count from the origin, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. The bracket because it's closed. Union. Where does the pink piece start? It starts right there. If I count over from the origin, oops, sorry, that 4 should have been negative. It's going to start at -1. Then notice I have an arrow, so we're asking ourselves, is that pointing to the left or pointing to the right? It's pointing to the right, so that's going to be positive infinity. So my domain would be -infinity to -4, union -1 to infinity. Look how there's a gap between, so I can't do anything to that interval. That would be my final answer. Now let's take a look at my range. So what piece goes the lowest? The lowest is this yellow piece. So notice, is that arrow pointing up or down? It's pointing down, so it's going to be -infinity. Where does that yellow piece stop? It stops right there. So if I count from the origin, that would be down 1. So that's going to be -1. Again, it's going to have a bracket because it's a closed. Union, where does the pink piece start? It starts right there, which is also down 1, so it's going to be -1. And then it goes up, and that arrow is pointing up, so that's positive infinity. Now see how there's not a gap, so I can cross those two together and squeeze that interval together to get -infinity to positive infinity. So the range technically would be all real numbers. Alright, let's do one more example here on the back, number 7. So if I look at number 7, if I start with my domain first, I notice my domain, the furthest left it goes is right there, which if I count over from the origin, that's going to be -2. Then it stops right here, so if I count from the origin, that's +2. Union, my second piece starts right there, which is also a +2. And then it stops right there. If I count over, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, +6, and it's a bracket because it's a closed circle. Again, notice how there's no gap, so I can get rid of that and squeeze my interval to get my domain to actually be -2 to +6. Now let's take a look at my range. How low does this graph go? Well, this is the lowest point right there. If I count down from the origin, that would be 1, 2, 3. I'm counting down, so it's going to be -3. How high does that piece? It stops right there, which if I count from the origin, that's going to be a +1. Union, the second piece starts at +2, and notice how it stays at +2. So you can just simply put bracket 2. So your range would be -3 to 1, union 2. Hopefully I have given you enough examples. If you're still confused in any way, please let me know, and I will do my best to explain over my Father Ryan or through email.